There is an update to the Russell Brand Jeremy Paxman interview. If you guys can remember, that was a almost divisive interview. There were many people that were upset at the way that we covered it because we were very critical of the questions that Jeremy Paxman was asking, or at least the way in which he was asking them. He seemed very dismissive of Russell Brand when he was making his points about how it doesn't make sense to vote, especially when you have to decide on the lesser of two evils and you don't really have a choice. Politicians are so corrupt at this point that it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're still going to get the same result. Well, it turns out that Jeremy Paxman and Russell Brand actually agree, and Russell Brand talked about it a little bit in a recent column in The Guardian. He said the following: turns out that among the disenchanted is Paxman himself, who spends most of his time at the meek heart of the political establishment and can't summons up the self-delusion to drag his nib across the ballot box. He, more than any of us, is aware that politicians are frauds.
You know, it's a very long op-ed by Russell Brand. I read it. I loved it. But I feel like I need an English-to-English dictionary sometimes.
Yes. There are a few words there that don't translate. Well,
right.
They translate, but we don't use
it.
I
don't know what a nib is, but it doesn't sound pretty. And so we're not from the UK, so a lot of people from the UK were very angry at our treatment of Paxman, who they say is a quality journalist and often plays devil's advocate and asks probing and hard questions, and did so with Russell Brand. Now, to me, he seemed far too dismissive of Russell Brand. Not just that he was asking tough questions, I'm always in favor of that, and I said that at the time, but that he seemed to be like, oh, well, you cheeky monkey, really? You know, you're a bit of a musician, are you? You don't vote! And then I also had a problem, honestly, with his facial expressions, though.
Okay. His facial expressions did make him seem as though he was smug. But there was actually something he said in the interview that rubbed me the wrong way. He told Russell Brand, "You want a revolution, you don't believe in democracy." Go back and watch it. I'm quoting him verbatim. And I just felt like that was like nonsense. There are revolutions in the name of democracy.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what Russell Brand talks about in this op-ed. And says, look, the reason we're not voting, and it turns out at some points Paxman didn't vote, is because we're so disenchanted that we don't have democracy. If we had real democracy, then I'm ecstatic. I'm ready to vote tomorrow, right? But no matter who we vote for, we get the same guy. Well, you know, and he talks about a party that Labor and the opposing party we're at, and he's like, look, here they are, they're all chummy, and they all, were claiming that they have different ideologies, and in the end, they have the same ideology. Better example, in the article, he refers to a guy who's named Clegg, and again, I don't know the specifics of the British, politicians and who's who, but he says, look, here was a guy who was saying we're going to get you free tuition.
And then he reneged on that.
Right, and he was in the liberal wing, and then he turns on and he works with Cameron, he's part of his government, and then he reneges on it, right? So he's like, what's the point of voting? Because the guy who said he was going to do the right thing doesn't do it anyway, and he winds up in the same exact place as the guys say, oh, we were supposed to be fearful of, not vote for. And by the way, he said then the students, basically rioted, but I loved his line. He said, people riot when dialogue fails.
Exactly.
And he said, he's basically saying, we're frustrated because it's obvious that the politicians are working for Wall Street and big business, right? And he doesn't say the rich, and I loved it in the article. He says, look, I'm rich, he says, referring to himself. And he says, Che Guevara was rich. He's like, I'm not against rich people. I'm against them having a different set of rules and them being able to buy the politicians. It's exactly what we say on the Young Turks, because it's exactly true in America, and unfortunately, apparently it's all too true in Britain as well. I mean, that's why we started Wolf Pack, to try to fix the system that doesn't work again. And he had a great line in here too. As you can tell, I'm excited about the op-ed. I thought he did a brilliant job with it.
And he touched on so many things, including the NSA and how there are parallels between the United States and Britain. So he covered everything you could imagine. You should definitely check it out.
And the line that I'm referring to is, he says, they say the system works. What they mean is, the system works for me. And he's so right about that. Oftentimes, with people in the media, I've gotten into debates, and they're indignant, like, what do you mean? We have the best system in the world. Yeah, dude, I know, because you're a millionaire anchor on TV. So it worked great for you, right? But it doesn't mean that it's working well for everybody. Like, a lot of people in Manhattan can't figure out why Bill de Blasio won by 50 points in the election. They're like, we don't understand. We loved Bloomberg. Bloomberg had done great. He'd done great for you, but not necessarily for the guy in the Bronx, right, who was getting stopped and frisked on a daily basis. So that's why they voted for overwhelmingly for change in New York. So the fact that Russell Brand is as he says, famous and rich, and sticking up for the little guy is a great thing. I mean, there's so many parts I like. He said, look, when I was poor and I was arguing against the system, they said, oh, you're bitter, right? Yeah. He said, now that I'm rich and I'm arguing against the system, they say, oh, you're a hypocrite.
But you're not a hypocrite. If you're rich and you're arguing against the system, then that gives you even more credibility because you're going against your own self-interest. You're speaking out against your own self-interest. So I actually give him a lot more credit for coming out and being so strong about what he believes in terms of the redistribution of wealth.
Right. If somebody's rich, what do you want them to do? Be like the Koch brothers, fight against the minimum wage, fight against the little guy, make sure that they get paid as little as possible so they have the right to pollute in your neighborhood? Or you want them to be like FDR and change the system so that it helps the little guy, the average guy, the middle class guy who's actually trying to work hard for a living, right? So the fact that you got rich people on the right side is awesome. And he said, look, you want me to vote? He said, but the problem is people in America, for example, he gives a British example and an American example. Well, they voted for change, and what they got? They got the guy who then gave trillions of dollars to the bankers and didn't fix the system at all. He said, well, you voted for that, and I'm not voting for that. And as he puts it that way, it's hard to argue with him.
It is.
Because, we were promised a lot of change, and we often are, and we almost never get it.
And Paxman himself admitted that at one point he was so discouraged about the political climate that he didn't vote himself, which I give him a lot of credit for because, as you can tell, in the initial interview, he did seem dismissive. And then he came out and wrote a column where he's like, yeah, I did it too. Let me just read you that part really quickly because I think that he said so in a really great way. He said, Russell Brand has never voted because he finds the process irrelevant. I can understand that. The whole green bench pantomime in Westminster looks a remote and self-important echo chamber, but it is all we have. In one recent election, I decided not to vote because I thought the choice was so unappealing. By the time the polls had closed and it was too late to take part, I was feeling really uncomfortable. The person who chooses not to vote cannot be even bothered to write none of the above on the ballot paper. Disqualifies him from passing any comment at all.
Now, look, I agree with Paxman that in the end you have to vote, okay? Because, yes, it's the lesser of two evils, but sometimes that makes a big difference, right? But I don't agree with Paxman when he says, what choice do we have? We have a lot of choices. Here in America, first of all, primaries. That's what they're there for, so you don't have to say, what can I do? Terry McAuliffe, the corporatist Democrat, or Cuccinelli, the insane right-winger. Those are your two choices in Virginia. Well, you should have primaried McAuliffe, and the good people of Virginia and the Democratic Party should have had a more progressive candidate, right? And who would have won, by the way, easier. McAuliffe barely beat that maniac Cuccinelli, right? Because people don't like the establishment guys. They're feeling the same thing that Russell Brand is feeling. They're frustrated, right? And then second of all, other than primaries, what you could do is you could change the system. And Russell Brand says towards the end, look, he's got a couple of ideas. One from David DeGraw, who's a great guy that I know, who was one of the founders of the 99% movement. We've interviewed him here on TYT Interviews. But you want the real idea, and David's ideas are great, don't get me wrong. The real idea is, and David totally agrees with this too, you fix how we fund elections. Because if the way, and like I said today, in today's election, we just had elections here, right? New Jersey, Virginia, Alabama even, and all these, and New York City, all these jurisdictions. Yes, Democrats won in some, Republicans won in others. Guess who won in every single instance? The guy with more money. Every time, okay? So that's what you gotta fix. That's why we started Wolfpack. I'm telling you, wolf-pack.com. I once ran into Russell Brand. Now I'm pissed that I didn't talk to him about that more because he's looking for an answer. That's the answer. It's not to say Wolfpack is the only answer in terms of how to fix getting money out of politics. It's to say that that's the only issue that matters, because if you don't fix that issue, however you fix it, you're not going to be able to fix anything else, because they work for the guys who fund them, and the guys who fund them are enormously wealthy, and unfortunately most of them are not like Russell Brand. They're like the people like the Koch brothers who want to fix the rules in their favor. Finally, Russell Brand with one last great line. He said, I don't mind getting my hands dirty because my hands are dirty already. I don't mind giving my life to this because I'm only alive because of the compassion and love of others.